Thank you for joining us here to talk about the state of the internet, what we know about it. Just to start before we get into introductions, just want to see show of hands. How many of you all, raise your hand please, if you have a mobile data subscription. So you have a mobile device that is connected to the internet consistently. Okay. What about, keep your hand raised if you have a home broadband subscription. Okay. Most, but not as many. Now for either of those, raise your hand if you feel like it is high quality. Either of those products is high quality. Okay. And what if you raise your hand if you feel like it costs more than it should? Okay. It's interesting, but that's what you often. I've been doing this in New York City for about over a dozen years, and generally I feel like you ask people, do you want your service to be, is it too slow or too expensive? Generally people say too expensive. What's funny is that we keep getting sold faster. But what we'll get into today is the New York City Internet Master Plan and just generally what we know about the state of the internet and how we know it. I'll, just a spoiler alert, the internet does not work for all New Yorkers. It does not serve all New Yorkers. And the goal of this panel is to consider who it does work for and who it does not work for and what we would need to change to make it work for all. My name is Joshua Breitbart. I'm the Deputy Chief Technology Officer in the Mayor's Office of the CTO. I direct the city's broadband strategy. Just a brief introduction, if you haven't had a chance to read the New York City Internet Master Plan, it's available online as a PDF. There are some hard copy versions as well. And what it really does, and this is all in the executive summary, is lay out the vision and principles for the internet in New York City. Equity, performance, affordability, privacy, and choice guide what we do. It documents the current state of the internet in terms of who has it and who doesn't, but also the conditions of the infrastructure and how that varies geographically throughout the city. So it looks at the different types of disparities, the gaps in infrastructure, and presents that through a range of new data sets that have never been compiled and analyzed before. It identifies what would need to exist in order to have universal broadband for all New Yorkers. It then talks about the impact that would have in terms of, bless you, in terms of the economic impact, number of jobs, increase in the size of the city's economy, what it can mean for New Yorkers' pocketbooks and wallets. And then it talks about the steps that the city can take to get there. So we have three people joining us in this session today who are going to speak to this in a range of different ways. And we also then will have some time for question and answers for people to either ask about the data that's available and how to make use of this, since this is, bless you, School of Data. And that's a focus here, but also to better understand and hear from you your thoughts about how you fit into this, because ultimately, we have data talking about millions of New Yorkers, but ultimately what it comes down to is each person, each household, each community, and what you want to do with the technology that is potentially available or today available to some, and hopefully in the future available to all. I'm going to allow the panelists, ask the panelists to introduce themselves. Ariel, would you start?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name is Yamil Lora. I'm a community coordinator and a theater coordinator at the Point CDC. We are a nonprofit based in Hunts Point, the Hunts Point section of the South Bronx. How many of you are familiar with Hunts Point? Yeah? Okay, cool. So we have an interesting mix over there of industrial activity and food and people that all those yeah, so basically through the work of Greta and Judge and a bunch of other cool people, we built a mesh network in Hunts Point, and that's the starting stage. So developing this idea of like producing phone networks in an urban setting, specifically.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Greta Byrum. I lead a research initiative for the New School for Social Research on digital equity. And in that capacity, I work with communities to build wireless networks, like we did with Yamil and the Point CDC. Then we also work in rural Tennessee and in Ulster County in Kingston, New York. And I teach new school students about broadband and the internet and digital equity.
Thank you. So just to start, Ariel, can you just maybe start with an overview of some of the data that we used in preparing the Internet Master Plan?
Yeah, so it's certainly a treasure hunt, I think, to find all the data. And over about
Could you speak up, please?
Yep. So over the course of about 2 years, we went really on this data journey to figure out existing conditions of internet service and access in New York. And I would say that the data spans from, you can think of it at a national level. There's national publicly available data provided by the American Census Bureau and then the FCC. And so the ACS provides demographic information, the FCC provides some picture of who is getting broadband service in the country and what kind of service they're getting. Probably go into this in more detail, but the FCC data is very imperfect. And part of the reason is because the data is collected by voluntary responses from service providers across the country. It's also on a block level, and so if one person in the census block, one household, or one business in the census block has access to broadband, then the FCC data shows that everyone in that block has that level of access. So problems there, but that's the federal level or national level. On a more localized level, we really leverage data already available on open data provided by the city. So New York City Planning Department, DCP offered a lot of data about buildings, city-owned buildings, which proved very valuable for what ultimately we positioned as a solution to help connect more New Yorkers to broadband. We use Do-It data about where there's free public Wi-Fi and where different franchises are located across the city. We wanted to spend some time trying to think like an ISP, to think like a business, and so we really drilled down into the details of, we read reports and studies and annual reports, that kind of thing, the financial data of different telecom providers. Those are many of the different things we looked at. The list keeps going, but.
And then can you talk a little bit about, so in terms of the economic impact, that was an instance where we relied on proprietary data.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about what that process is?
Sure. So the economic impact analysis, what we did was we used with the help of REMI, which is kind of it's an industry standard dynamic model for measuring future impacts to changes made today or changes made somewhere in the future. And what we did was we projected changes in productivity based on access to broadband and also employment growth based on access to broadband. And so we used REMI as a tool. After understanding kind of baseline growth, we kind of flipped some levers to understand what happens if everyone in New York City is connected.
Sorry to interrupt. The issue for live streaming is that we don't have mics, so the best I can do is make them.
Try and click a couple of these on.
I can sit closer.
Yeah, if you could
just move closer and talk into a mic or something.
We can move and you guys can sit here.
No, 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 that's
Whatever's
fine.
best.
Just move closer and talk into the mic.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, yeah, great.
Great.
I think if you stay a little back and just project, it'll be fine. Everybody, if
All
you
right.
agree, just move forward a couple
Yeah,
feet
and
and
then
project.
just switch them on when you need them.
Okay.
I'm just gonna point out you
It doesn't seem to be like a social distancing, ideal.
It's okay, we're all friends. You guys are welcome to stay.
Promise, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So the economic impact analysis measures the incremental growth once, assuming ubiquitous broadband connectivity. So once everyone in New York is connected to broadband, what that means in terms of new jobs, in terms of more personal spending income, and in terms of economic growth, kind of like a GCP number.
Yeah, and Greta, can you talk a bit about the qualitative data?
Yeah, so, as Ariel was mentioning, there's a lot of sort of flaws and difficulty with how public data about broadband is, mapped and analyzed and produced. So the FCC data that Ariel mentioned, there's the problem of, the quality of the data going into that with, and that's historically been sort of a political football, and there's lots of folks that have written really good analyses of, why that data is not great. Carl Bode has written some really good work about that. And then with the census data on broadband in people's homes, a lot of the questions, that's, survey-based data, and a lot of the questions are confusing. So, do you know whether you have a cable provider or DSL provider, or, so things like that a lot of normal people just don't know when they go to answer those questions. And so both of the main data sets that we have for broadband are confusing, and we also see, confusing and inadequate, I would say. We also see that there's, things move very fast in the world of broadband, so how are people actually interacting with networks and with data changes really rapidly, so there's a lag time with data collection. This is also really complicated data in the sense that it's what I would call socio-technical, so that means you have a whole bunch of social factors interacting with technical factors, and so officially, our part of the work, the New School team's part of the work, was to look at how much can people actually pay for broadband in New York City. And we just found there's so many variables in that question that we really had to dive into qualitative data, meaning talking to people about how they feel, what's impacting their ability to pay for broadband service, how are they actually using the internet and connected technologies. And so how we did that was really to dive into qualitative research processes and to really structure qualitative data in a very rigorous way. And so we did structured interviews, and we did focus groups, and then we took a massive amount of just what we heard from people, and we coded all of this data. So Josh, do you want to pull up? Yeah. So this is just an example of what a code sheet looked like. So we basically have two master code sheets that both have just very rich qualitative data in them. And this one, you can see we sort of landed on a set of kind of descriptors that helped shape recommendations around ability to pay. So those were comfort, internet literacy, safety and privacy concerns. I could talk about why we sort of landed on these categories, which informed our recommendations. I think, a really important one would be emergent mobility. So this has to do with how people are cutting the cord and how wireline, home-based broadband access, it's the dynamics of how people use that with comparison to mobile internet is really changing as, younger people are much more likely to use mobile broadband. People are using mobile data as they move through the city, through their day.
So we're just seeing, it used to be sort of in broadband policy that the end result of a successful broadband strategy would be people have internet at home. And we didn't find, that's irrelevant or people don't need that anymore, but we did find that it's more complex than that. Because, for example, people with unstable housing situations, they need to be able to get on their email at lots of different places during the day, especially if they're awaiting an email about employment. Younger people are really innovating with mobile devices and mobile technologies, and so they're using this is emergent mobility. They're using mobile broadband in ways that we haven't seen before. So starting to capture some of these much more complicated dynamics that inform people's ability to pay, what they want to pay for, what they're able to pay for, how much they're able to pay, what they're balancing their broadband cost against in their calculations. These are all just too complex to kind of capture with the kind of data that we had from FCC. And
yeah, and Greta, and so as you were doing this qualitative research, we were going back into our quantitative numbers and rethinking the way that which data we were pulling, but also how we were aggregating it. So, we started from a place just wanting to connect all New Yorkers to broadband at home, but then that principle quickly expanded because we realized how important it is to have access both in the public realm, but anywhere you go, and maybe your mobile service is also your home service because that's what you can afford, or that's your preference. And so we started thinking about what do people pay today for both their home internet and for their mobile service. And when you add those two numbers up, it gets to be pretty ridiculous. And how can we create infrastructure in the city that provides for the expansion of both kinds of networks throughout different technologies?
So we
just also want to point out, there were more than 50 stakeholder interviews that were, or responses to a request for information that are also gathered, as well as engineering studies looking at what the physical condition of the city is at key points throughout the city. And all of this data is more or less, all this data is compiled in open data, broken down by different groups and different geographies, and compiling this together. When I first started working for the city about 5 years ago, I think there may have been one open data set that referred to anything about broadband connectivity, and we now have a significant run of all this data. And if you open it up and were to look at it, it's a significant number of indicators, each at the neighborhood level. Some of the things are totally new information that you can't necessarily find about every other city, and some of it is, as Ariel and Greta were saying, federal data that's been analyzed at the local level and put into a form that people are familiar with open data would be able to use. I do want to ask Yamil, can you speak to what the Point is doing, and what is not captured at this sort of citywide data level that you see at the neighborhood level?
Yeah. So I'm very surprised to hear you all talk about data this way. I want to just put something out there first. I'm not a data expert in any way. I'm learning here. I'm actually a musician and a singer. And I happen to run a Wi-Fi project. But that has a lot to say also, as much as what can each one of us do for our communities and for our peers. There's just so much that is not captured. I don't know because I don't master these data sets, but what I could tell you is that in my experience, there's compelling stories that drive this data collection. And then hopefully these data sets will tell compelling stories that will shape policy and help us make our city better, or compel people that speak data do and move and do things. I can tell you like that. Certainly, my work with young people has taught me a lot in terms of what you're saying, like the way that they use the internet. So I could tell you that some of the people in the pictures that you see there, they don't even have internet at home. They just, for example, Tony and Chris, they don't have internet at home. They are three brothers, and they live with their mother. Single mother raising them, and all they have is their phones. And until they started doing the digital stewardship with me, they didn't even have phones. So these are young people growing up in the Bronx, and they had to just go to libraries to do their homework. Mr. Marshall is also a digital steward, and he certainly has no internet access at home. He goes to the Point to do his business or to apply for work and everything else. So these are just the stories of people that Bronx natives or Bronxites. And even Alejandra, she lives in our block. And there's something weird that happens in the middle of her block. There is no connectivity, right?
So I'm connected to Optimum, but the free hotspots, I have a blind spot that's right in my house, so I can never get the free hotspot.
So she is like this omission, like there's not enough signal to get to her house. But you know, another thing that I would point out, for example, that is we've learned in our like local environment is like that generational gaps or differences also shape our internet environment for everybody. For example, our block is a block that is of homeowners, you know, people that own their houses, and we need access to the roofs in order to put antennas. But turns out that most of these people, they're seniors. So they don't care about the internet. They don't want to have the internet. And they're more concerned about their privacy. So it takes a lot of demystifying the internet and teaching and also building relationships and trust to get the cooperation so that then we can serve other people that do need the internet. And, you know, that work could be done by anybody. It doesn't matter how old or how young you are.
Yeah, I think that was, one of the things that's really difficult to find in the data is what are those unique strengths and resources, and those, you know, the organizers in the community. You know, the census doesn't ask you like, are you a community organizer? You know, like, can you help build with your neighbors to solve problems and create new solutions? That's something that doesn't really come through in the federal data. Greta, do you want to talk about why it was important to create that sort of neighborhood framework in the plan?
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, I think one of the things about creating any sort of plan for internet access or policies around internet access is that what you're really going for is not necessarily internet access as much as you're trying to hit other targets around community well-being. So access to opportunity, you know, employment, housing, like pretty much, you know, the things that communities need and are already working on. And so, you know, when you think about the effectiveness of a plan or like, is this doing what we want it to do? How do you kind of understand the impact that it's having beyond just connecting people to the internet? And so as we were working, we were talking to folks like Yamil who are really engaged with their communities. And the Point, you guys just celebrated what, your 25th anniversary. So the Point has been doing this amazing work in the South Bronx for 25 years. And it's an arts-focused organization, but so tied to all kinds of advocacy in that community. And so any initiative that's going to work in terms of broadband and is going to make broadband work in order to reach these other goals around like housing and education and employment, it has to be tied to what's already working in the community. So working with an organization like the Point and understanding what are their priorities, what are their resources, what's already happening in this community, and how could we connect that with understanding needs around broadband and also understanding how to support you know, how broadband could ultimately support the other goals that they're trying to reach. And so a lot of what we were trying to do was like gather that data in such a way that we could help tell those stories and bring those stories into the frame for the planning process.
And Ariel, you mentioned before trying to think like an ISP. From that perspective, why do you think it's important to break the city down into the what city planning calls these neighborhood tabulation areas?
Sure. So we very quickly discovered that a one-size-fits-all solution wasn't going to work for a city, for any place, but especially for a city as complex and nuanced as New York. And I think Josh has some maps up here, but you'll kind of see repeated patterns of Manhattan and the denser, higher income neighborhoods of New York City being served pretty well, fairly well by internet service, and that the outer boroughs and the lower income neighborhoods really just lacking kind of a basic standard. And so we found there's a few advantages of breaking it into neighborhoods. One, of course, was the ability to zoom in and really to diagnose both the problem and then hypothesize potential solutions or position potential solutions for partnerships down the road. There's also this idea of kind of seeding expansion. New York is so big that that new internet service providers aren't used to kind of tackling a territory the size of like our city here. It's 8.5 million people, 5 boroughs, different counties, all of that. So by breaking down our planning process into neighborhoods, we thought of this approach, something that can come up in our USB, our Universal Solicitation for Broadband, maybe, that that would allow smaller players to come in, kind of start new, get their sea legs really in a neighborhood, and build both momentum and build the types of adoption and financial considerations that they need to continue to expand.
Yeah, and I think it was also, I think it also helped with, you know, 2 other things in addition to what you're saying. You know, or to your point, the companies that are here and have been here know a lot of this stuff just sort of, you know, because they're out there doing it. But if new companies are going to come in, you know, how do we use data to create a level playing field for those to come in? I think it also helped in dealing with some of the problems in the data we talked about before, because rather than just being really focused on what is the number of, you know, this particular unit, we could start to see patterns. And so even if there are flaws in some of the data, the patterns matched what we understood, you know, to be the case based on our direct observations and the expert interviews that we were conducting.
Yeah, to put a point on it, the relativity was huge. Being able to understand one neighborhood's level of access to the next neighborhood's level of access really helped us pinpoint maybe what the problem was or what the solution could be.
So should we take some questions from the audience? Art?
I'm down here from Albany, and about 9 years ago I got involved with advocating for community broadband. And, you know, my nature is to delve into stuff and try to figure it out, you know, and figure out what systematically and the structural problems are. And so, you know, some of the same problems, I'm also a member of the several collaboratives and the Rural Broadband Congress and all that. And so some of the same problems that you have here, we have there in rural communities. Any of you, I know some of the school districts do and are using the Sprint 1 Million Project Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
There are some around here that are using it because I've
Yeah, we have
talked to
a
people.
partnership that's about 30,000 units in that partnership.
So we're just finding out about the Sprint 1 Million Project Foundation. And for those of you that don't know, there's about 5 million students in America that they're either, you know, don't have the resources at home to connect to do their homework. And about 70% of what kids do for homework now requires media to complete it. Just simple and plain as that. You know, if you don't have it, you know, you gotta go rush out to some place where, you know, you might not be able to get it done, so you show up at school without homework done, and enough time to doing that, the kids basically become discouraged and ultimately drop out, and that starts that whole school to prison pipeline and all that stuff potentially being populated. And so Sprint made a compact with whoever, Department of Education and the government or their board, whoever decided they were gonna take on $1 million of that $5 million. And so that's where that program came. And they offer Wi-Fi access, or you can get a cell phone, but the whole idea is to turn on hotspots so that the kids can do their homework safely at home as opposed to having to come back from McDonald's or the library or whatever at 9 o'clock at night. So we're just finding out about that. And so, we actually went through our first model was with Rochester. Free and reduced lunch measures for Rochester is about 98%. So nobody had access. We had 2,100 people that responded. 1,850 needed access at home.
Right.
So imagine the gravity of that problem. And so that we started there. And anyway, those are the kind of problems and kind of things that I get involved in up in Albany. And I get involved in helping communities to find, resources to, we don't have AT&T in a lot of places or Charter or whoever.
One of the things that we saw in really, diving into the situation in New York City, and understanding that we have, in the case of Department of Education, had this partnership with Sprint, which was the largest single partnership within that whole program of anywhere in the country. We had the largest partnership under the Department of Housing and Urban Development's Connect Home program. We have the largest system of public computer centers offering free resources of any city in the country, and yet we still face the disparities and the challenges and the gaps that we had. So we understood, as you heard before, that there was not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution or a single partnership. And so the Internet Master Plan provides a framework for bringing a portfolio of solutions, a portfolio of partnerships. So understanding that in some cases communities are taking actions themselves, how can we better understand the impact of that approach, while also looking at other areas where there's just not the infrastructure in the ground, and that may require some other types of capital investment from private or public and private partnerships to make that happen. Greta, do you want to speak a little bit to the types of community planning processes that you use both in partnership with urban communities as well as rural communities?
So I've worked with urban and rural communities to build local broadband, and I think generally the rule that always works for me in all those contexts is to really talk to people about what's already happening in the community. So it's exactly what I said before. This is about, what are people concerned about, what's going to get people motivated to get involved in a process, and so that, like, if I come in, my team comes in, saying, like, let's build broadband together, that we don't then leave in a couple of years and, sort of leave something that people don't feel like invested in and feel like they own locally. So, I feel like actually, Yamil, you might be better at talking about the process that we've engaged with on that. But, I think it's sort of a diving into really some of the social complexities that are going on in neighborhoods at the same time that you're doing some knowledge transfer about how broadband works and how broadband could address some of those. Does that seem right to you? Yeah. We worked together starting in 2016, right? And it's taken some time to build a network. But what do you feel like what are you all using the network for? So, like, what beyond just getting people on the internet, what is, happening in your neighborhood as far as the goals that you have there?
Well, I can answer that, but I would also love to hear them talk about it.
You guys wanna say something?
Yeah, you can
Turn on your mics.
Turn on your mic, how are we using the internet?
So, my name is Alejandra, I work with Yamil. I'm the graphic designer at the Point, and I got involved in the Wi-Fi project through, because I live and work in the community. And a few years ago, 6 years ago, when Sandy happened, we are a waterfront community, a peninsula, and we were affected by it. Luckily, it was a low tide, but that's opened the eyes of what we can do for resiliency in our community related to different aspects. And Wi-Fi was one of the initiatives that came out for the community. The other initiative was electric grid, or that's how you call it? Microgrid for the food center, that is the biggest food center in the city, probably in the world. And so to protect the market was the electric grid, and for the community it was like a sense of how we communicate in case of emergency and how we prepare. So two things came out, the Wi-Fi project as well as a page with Point NYC that I developed with my intern here, Luis. And this is our two digital stores that are really doing the work that we talk about. And yeah, so it's a question of resiliency for us as much as access.
Yeah, let's come back with a hat. You, yeah.
I was wondering if you could say more about how you see these different things fitting together, like the Hunts Point as a community-driven kind of ground-up program, along with, I know there's some existing mix of like linked NYC kiosks, there's other like public Wi-Fi programs that currently exist, and then kind of like bringing in, or like creating a space, I guess, for new ISPs to enter, like, yeah. I don't know who that is to, but maybe anyone.
Yeah, well, I'll just say, I think that what the initial idea is also is to, by looking at the city as neighborhoods, to understand what what exists within each neighborhood and what can come next, and then leveraging the city's real estate assets and data to bring in new partnerships, but to use them to build on what exists already in each area. So whether it's the existing infrastructure, the existing partnerships, the existing public computer centers, or just the existing buildings that the city might have access to, that those become the resources that are made available within each neighborhood. And I think one of the key things is going to be, and I think one of the challenges, I'd love to hear people speak more to this, is, as we were saying before, what is not captured in the data that is essential to making those partnerships work. What's some of the social infrastructure, the cultural history, the human relationships that are really essential to making sure the internet is not just there as a product, but contributing to the needs of each community. I think what we've tried to do is create a data framework to address the infrastructure aspects of that, but then from within the neighborhood level, there really has to be a collaborative process that happens from there on, and that's the next phase of the work.
Yeah, and just to add to that, sorry, Yamil, please.
Go ahead.
Well, one thing is any broadband project like what the Point is doing, and I don't know how to turn this mic on anymore, but.
It's malfunctioning.
Yeah, okay. Oh, there we go. Okay. Woo. So any like local broadband project, they're gonna have to purchase internet from a wholesaler, right? So I think the city level planning partly goes into like making sure that there's like companies that they can buy from in order to then distribute locally. So that's one way that I think the big picture and the little picture come together. And then also, I think it's really interesting what Yamil was saying about privacy. Is definitely something that we found in our research, is that you have to start to understand really complex things, like how do people feel about privacy in a neighborhood like Hunts Point, where there's like a lot of immigrant communities, a lot of people facing many different kinds of, challenges, and so, privacy is not just about people nervous about being hacked. It's also people nervous about surveillance, people nervous about political targeting, harassment. And so really understanding dynamics like that, then you start to understand what kind of programming would help this community not only interact with the internet, but do it in a way that helps them achieve like what they want to see in their community. Sorry, yeah.
Did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add to what you say and also what Greta is saying. Because your initial question is about how Link NYC kind of like meets community networks and how do I see it in like Hunts Point? How do we look at it? Well, let me tell you, I think Link NYC is a very great opportunity to find sources of backhaul, that connection to the internet for community networks like us. I look forward to see this considered somehow in the master plan, because what we're doing is different from ISPs, and we want to make that a very important difference, make that clear. So there should be, I believe, opportunity for community networks to have backhaul at affordable prices. Now, I want to add something. I want to say something and I believe that I'm a great champion and believer in the digital stewardship. I think everything starts there for solutions at the local community level, from my perspective. You could see I've had, gentlemen and young people in my workshops, and it is key to know that not everybody will be able to build maybe an installation, but everybody in the community needs to understand to a certain degree what the internet is capable of and how it affects you, so that we can all contribute to the health of our digital environment. And that's a way to activate our community and organize. So I think that's a key thing.
And we did also, there is another report we did looking at free public Wi-Fi in New York City, where for the first time, instead of just looking at all Wi-Fi as if it's created equal, starting to break it down in terms of having the same sort of principles and standards that we have in the Internet Master Plan, but understanding the use cases, because a community network might not be the same purpose as what's in a library, might not be the same thing as what's put out on a commercial corridor, and it's not necessarily about having 100% of everything covered. It's about having people's needs met and doing that equitably and to a high quality throughout the city. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sorry, I'm like a little bit anxiously waving my hand. So one thing that's concerning me is, so I'm working in the data science and machine learning field, and all of the companies I'm competing against or my colleagues work at, none of them are in New York City. The nearest competitor is in Toronto, and then you have in San Francisco, and a huge reason for that is the distance from the data centers and when you talk about computational load, the speed of the internet connection. So one thing that really concerns me is what's the fastest internet connection you can get from here to, let's just say, across the river to Newark. My understanding is that it's inadequate, but I guess I'm just wondering if that's something that you're addressing, and is there any data that you are trying to get? Or?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that that's another way of another way of asking the question about what does all this data mean for the point? Because you have a very specific use case, and it's very difficult to present a citywide understanding that speaks to the specific needs of each business and each individual. And if you ask that question about a connection from here to Newark, and we were in Lower Manhattan, it'd be a different answer than if we're in Long Island City, and it'd be a different answer than if we're in Coney Island. And so, I'm happy to speak with you about the specifics of businesses where you might be located. But for some parts of the city, and just generally, we do have a lot more fiber operators, commercial fiber operators in New York City than almost any other city has. But if your office is located further from where most of them are concentrated, that might not be enough for you. And if what you need is an internet connection to be able to do homework at home at night versus compete with the largest data science firms, you know, globally, you know, that use case is also going to be quite different. And so understand, I think one of the things that we did find, Ariel, maybe you can speak to this, is that one of the things that ubiquitous high-speed commercial connectivity could unlock a lot more business opportunities in more parts of the city. Ariel, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And these business opportunities kind of span a whole gamut from small business creations and, you know, anything from retail along like major corridors to startups and tech businesses that are trying to grow. I think that there's a correlation between rents and access to broadband. It's wrapped up in many, many other factors. It's not a direct correlation, but the fact that right now cheaper places to locate your businesses and your offices don't have the same strength in broadband connectivity, nor the same number of choices in commercial fiber offerings, so you wind up paying more for getting less. It's the same thing on the residential side. So the idea is that if there was choice and good quality choices kind of across the city, you're unlocking new business growth opportunities in places like Jamaica or places like Hunts Point, Jerome Ave and South Bronx. And so we looked at that a lot, and it's certainly a benefit to economic competitiveness of the city.
And just, you know, two of the indicators here that are mapped are the commercial fiber choice, which is really about, do you have 3 options in the neighborhood, and the coverage, which is within the neighborhood, how much of that area has no commercial fiber, which would tell you how much you might have to pay up front in order to get that connection. In the gray hoodie.
Hi, I'm Franz, I'm a librarian, and I just actually had a question, sort of going back to the communities. What's it like for a community to, what are the things that the challenges for purchasing, like, internet service? Like, I mean, how does that work? Like, how does a community buy internet service? And what are the challenges?
Yeah, so challenges include, you know, this is the commercial fiber availability map, but there's also, you guys have a map that's just how many ISPs are operating in different communities. So in a place that only has one internet service provider, which is actually a lot of New York City communities, that ISP probably doesn't want to sell bulk bandwidth to a community that's going to redistribute it, right? So
And definitely won't sell it cheap in a way that community is then able to make the Wi-Fi free or highly affordable.
So that's where something like a public-private partnership is great, where you know, you have a partnership that already makes it, you know, where the private sector partner is already sort of bought into how do we support this community in terms of social outcomes. So that's one way to go. The project that I worked on with Yamil, which was the Economic Development Corporation of New York City investing in connectivity in Sandy impacted communities. For that project, we tried to purchase at least 2 connections per neighborhood so that we could be sure that if one got flooded and went out, then there would be another connection. And that was really a struggle in some places, and also it was hard because it's not easy to find the information of who provides service where, and so we ended up in some cases just having to Google like ISPs in my neighborhood because, you know, it's not easy to get that information, and so a lot of stuff kind of runs through who knows who. You know, so like we worked with a technology provider that knew a lot of the ISPs personally, and so a lot of it was personal connections. When you get to that part of it, it's still pretty dicey, and yeah, not cheap. So you kind of have to.
So it's like a combination of financial and legal.
Yes, it's really about the terms of service. So, you know, with the redistribution of a bandwidth, the bulk bandwidth that you purchase, it's about the terms of service with that provider, not about legality in that case.
And then also, sorry, just to sort of piggyback on that question, I saw you've been flashing mesh networks. Like, what are the potentials of mesh networks? You could maybe talk a little bit about mesh networks.
So that, yeah, that's what we're doing. That's like a whole nother niche conversation. I would say generally it's doable but difficult in New York City because of buildings, and then there's just a ton of traffic on the Wi-Fi signals. But that's pretty much what we did with the Point and 4 other neighborhoods, although I would say they're more like hybrid, not solely mesh, because we had to integrate other, point-to-point.
I want to add something to what you said, but I think what's important, or one really great advantage that we built with technology that allows for mesh, so we can do a hybrid model where needed, flexibility.
I mean, how much does that cost?
Cheap.
Let's
I would say
yeah,
it's
talk
a good thing to talk
yeah.
about when we wrap, and because I think the other thing is it works also under some conditions and is more challenging under other conditions. So it's really about how do we understand the right approaches in the right areas. You with the jacket, yeah.
Thanks. Hi. So thanks for bringing this panel together. I've been very curious about this master plan. And I think one thing that we should acknowledge here is that a big reason that there's not universal coverage in New York City is because it's not profitable, and that it's been a failure of private industry to provide internet, and they don't do it where they don't think it's profitable, or there's other reasons, but that's a big one. And I also think that there's been a long history we've seen with the city incentivizing private development of ISPs to oftentimes bad results. If you look at the attempts to get Verizon to put Fios throughout the city, they failed to do so. The city had to sue Verizon, and they still didn't complete the job. Even with the Link NYC kiosks, we've seen, I just read recently, over 500 kiosks are still waiting to be built that were supposed to have already been built, not to mention the fact that there's horrendous privacy concerns with those. Meanwhile, there's another plan that we haven't really talked about here, and I'm wondering if this is addressed at all in the Internet Master Plan, which would be a real publicly owned ISP. Now, I know that the IBEW, Local 3, which represents the striking Spectrum workers, they have said that they support such a plan, a municipal broadband plan. And from where I'm sitting, it seems like a good idea. Like, it's a way to reduce costs. It is a way where you can leverage these things like having capital investment and scale in a way that we would actually be able to wire up bigger parts of the city. And in terms of folks here who would be concerned about data, it's both a way to collect much more municipal data, and it's also a way to better regulate the data regarding privacy concerns and do data management and things of this nature. So I like that idea, and I'm wondering how that fits into, if that was considered with this plan.
So I'll say I do think that the city does have strong privacy protections and privacy principles that we exercise. My understanding of the IBEW proposal was a co-op model, which is different from a municipal ownership model. The largest municipally owned ISP in the country. I don't know. I thought it was on. The largest municipally owned ISP in the country serves a population of about 180,000. So again, if you look at how you could apply those existing models, even in theory, in a place like New York City, you'd have to think about where that would work. The current charter network only covers part of the city, so it really is about what's strategic. The plan does speak to the potential for public investment, but even there, you have to think about where's the right place to focus that to have the greatest impact, and where does it enable new opportunities rather than not wind up having the impact we'd like to have, or not taking full advantage of the types of contributions that either community networks or new startup service providers or potentially co-op models might be able to do. There's a lot of opportunity for private investment in New York City. What we want to see is it not happening over and over and over again in the same areas, but spreading out into the areas where it historically has not happened. I think we're at time. Did you want to, you had one more, you had a question? Did you want to share your, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I actually had a relevant question to that, which is that what you just described about the ISPs and how not being really sure, like, what ISPs are in what area, and I know that lots of ISPs have monopolies over their areas. If we're not gonna have this kind of municipal broadband plan, what are we gonna do about these ISPs? Like, how will it be possible for us to make sure that these ISPs are not price gouging?
Well, the threshold that in the choice principle is just to have at least is that 3, which would be transformative, and it may in some areas of the city have more than that, and it may be that over time there would be more than that. But I don't know if anybody else wants to speak to it.
Sure. I'd say in the course of our research for this plan, we spoke to over 50 different folks involved in internet service provision, including many ISPs. And there's a lot of niche and community ISPs that are out there that are offering great services. They protect privacy, net neutrality. They don't throttle, and they charge competitive prices. They struggle in getting a foothold big enough to compete kind of with the incumbents today. So we thought about that in the course of the plan, and also more. One of the theories we kind of operated under is more competition, more choice would just bring better product. It would bring lower prices and better product.
Yeah, and it adds that, I mean, I feel like what you're both talking about is market failure, and that's been the problem with, broadband provision in this country for 100 years. and so, building equity in a place like New York, where we're starting from a place where there's radically unequal availability of this infrastructure from place to place, how do you do that in a city this big? And that's really what Josh was pointing at. And so, I think, for example, it's a lot easier to build where Empire City Subway is versus where it isn't. So where there's open access conduit or, common carriage, Empire City Subway, which manages the layer under the streets in Manhattan and the Bronx, they have to rent to anybody. That doesn't exist in Brooklyn and Queens, and Staten Island. But so you're really starting from different places in different boroughs. It's an enormous amount of land mass. So how do you address the equity issue, given that undertaking a municipal broadband plan would be becoming a municipal broadband provider would be an enormous undertaking politically. Right, so I think there's a couple of things that I just want to point to, that the Internet Master Plan does include an open access, target. So if the city, like Empire City Subway, was able to say, we are going to rent to anybody who needs conduit, and they're able to build out that kind of open access backbone, that would be an amazing contribution towards beginning to build equity. And then the other thing I would say is franchising is a real, it's a dynamic process, and that it's something that also everybody can get involved in the public process and try to, when the city is making plans and is negotiating with service providers, that's a place for everybody to get involved. And if we sort of just say well, it's up to the city to make sure that people are equally served and there's not kind of a public demand, we're not going to get there. So I think we can't just expect the city to do everything. And part of this is about increasing internet literacy everywhere in every neighborhood. And so that's the other part of what we're trying to do with folks like the Point. So not just media literacy, not just internet literacy. So it's not just about how you interact with web pages. We all have to understand better. And, I think folks in this room are, good test cases. We have to understand how the internet works. What are the different parts? Jolly. Internet Society.
The local chapter of the Internet Society certainly agrees with that. Thank you all. I would invite you to look at the Internet Master Plan, look at this last section, phase of implementation, to understand where it's coming. I think Greta's exactly right, that looking to your community, understanding what your strengths are, how you compare to other neighborhoods, and understanding what you think the solution ought to be is is going to be a real strength and a real important step to making sure that whatever steps the city does take next meets the real needs and opportunities that are in each neighborhood. Thank you very much, and thanks to the panelists.